Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the Tomb Kings, Legendary Lords, and Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Before I get into the individual lords from the worst to the very best, I do need to talk about the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings are a faction that has free recruitment, but they do have unit caps for pretty much every unit except Skeletal Spearmen and Warriors, which you can spam with to your heart's content. However, beyond unit caps, and the unit caps are tied to buildings, beyond the unit caps you also have army caps. You can only get one army, for most of them, at the very start of the campaign. So basically you're a Legendary Lord army. Which means that their early game is incredibly limited. I wouldn't use the word weak, but it can be weak as well. But limited all the same. However, the Tomb Kings, once they get going, they do become incredibly powerful, being able to mass high tier units far more quickly than anyone else because they don't have to pay money for it. Yes, their structures can take a while to build and take a significant amount of money to construct, though that has been reduced in Immortal Empires. But really, once the Tomb Kings get going, once they get their heroes unlocked, and once they get Books of Nagash, they do become quite powerful. Though something to be mentioned about the Books of Nagash is that where the books are, I mean, there are certain positions for each Legendary Lord where the books will be, but the effects of the books will be random. For instance, one of the most powerful books is this one, the 5th book of Nagash, which gives you army capacity and unit capacity for Tomb Guard with halberds, and skeleton chariots. If you could get that book early on, especially as Settra, but not just Settra, you would have a significant amount of power in your campaign. But here, this one is in Caracate Peaks, whereas it could be in Lamia, or it could be in here in the Rogue Army, giving you much easier access to it. Certainly, the randomness factor to all of it does make the some campaigns harder than others. I feel like if there's anything that needs to be changed with the Tomb Kings, is that where the books are, or that books that are more useful should be closer to you, whereas the ones that are less useful or less important should probably be further away. Also, some books are just really far away. I mean, who really is going to go all the way into Ulthuan, basically in the Shrine of Cain, or rather to deal with a rogue army, buying the Shrine of Cain just for campaign line of sight and trade tariffs. Very few people would undertake such a journey. You might, sure, much later on your campaign, but it would be a very long journey. So I think the positioning of the books should be changed. But anyway, with all that said, let's start from the bottom to the top. And at the very bottom is Settra the Imperishable. Campaign-wise, he gets 20 growth in all provinces. That's pretty solid, though Tomb Kings don't necessarily lack for growth, so it kind of feels redundant to a degree, but it will allow you to grow much faster than anyone else, as well as reducing construction time for all buildings. So for instance, this barracks for the other Legendary Lords would take 2 turns. For Settra, it takes 1 turn, which is a significant amount of power he can get early on. Okay, that's great. However, in spite of that, and in spite of the fact that he does get a significant amount of combat power, control to all provinces from his skill tree +2, +1 control from his set bonus, +3 from his swords, he can get a significant amount of control, but control is not really too big of an issue for the Tomb Kings, to be quite honest with you. In spite of that, and in spite of the power he gets, as well as the buffs to Tomb Princes and Tomb Guards for himself, though he does get hero capacity +1 for Tomb Princes, hero recruit rank, +4 in total for Tomb Princes. In spite of that, Settra has a lot of issues. He starts at war with 2 enemies, and the vampire counts over here in the Brotherhood are going to be able to get the full stack fairly quickly, and they start with the Terrorgeist, which can be an issue to deal with from the very start. Though his immediate concern is going to be Numas. And he doesn't necessarily have a really powerful army. The only 2 good units he really has are these Tomb Guards with halberds. Yes, he can recruit skeletal chariots from the very start, though honestly infantry would have been much better from my perspective, given the fact that you're going to have a series of minor siege battles and more minor settlement battles to deal with. And Camry starting only as tier 1 is going to limit you as well. But those are just your initial enemies. Then you have Manfred, then you have Forek, then you have Labaras, or Khalida rather. And to the west you have Repellent, you have Arkhan, you have other issues. And to the north, of course, you have Skarbrand and the Savage Orcs. And the thing is, your territory is designed in such a way that it's quite likely that all of these lords, be them major factions or minor factions, are going to be able to take advantage of that. And you're not particularly well liked by your neighbors. And that is going to create a lot of issues for you when you are playing as Settra the Imperishable. So his campaign is off to a rough start, and the Tomb Kings in general do have a rougher start than some other factions. Some legendary lords can have it much better than others, but Settra has it the worst out of all of them. Yes, he can get incredibly powerful in terms of his personal combat potential, be it with the War Sphinx or the Chariot of the Gods, as well as the various buffs he gets through his special skill tree. He can get an enormous amount of combat potential, that is true, but he starts in such a rough position that honestly I would not recommend playing Settra right now unless you are in for a lot of pain and suffering, unless you like a lot of pain and suffering rather, because that is what his campaign is going to be for a fairly long time. I feel he could really desperately use an extra army capacity that would help him a great deal in his campaign to be able to get going, because the problem is you're going to max out his army, okay, you max out his army and then it's going to take you a significant amount of time, 14 turns, or a lot of battles to get pick jars and money to be able to get that extra army capacity. Once you do get that extra army capacity or 2 extra armies, things do get much better, but you still have to deal with all the myriad of threats that do surround you with a territory that is fairly exposed. And that is the issue that Settra has. And hell, you can even see this reflected in the way the AI plays him, because in a lot of campaigns that I've played in this game, Settra has generally struggled, even when controlled by the AI and Legendary, Settra has generally struggled to get anything done. And that, I feel, reveals the nature of his problems. He does start just way too limited. Tier 1, chariots, yeah, just way too limited. The Land of the Dead is a great province, don't get me wrong, if you can protect it, but it's that if that's going to be the biggest problem for him. Now in number 3 we have Grand Hierophant Khatep, the leader of the mortuary cult, exiled by Settra to try and fix their whole issue of undeath. He starts over here in the Red Desert, and the Red Desert is a significantly better province than the Land of the Dead, in that it's nowhere near as exposed as the Land of the Dead. It's not quite as good, you don't have the same kind of resources, the gold for instance, but you do have a 4-region province that's fairly safe from enemies, though there are multiple pathways for it to be attacked, but your neighbors aren't particularly hostile to you. You can decide who you're going to fight, for instance, and you can settle the mountains. You can make an alliance with Grombrindle, though it might be the wiser idea to actually make an alliance with Malekith, because the Dark Elves are significantly more powerful when played by the AI than the Dwarves are at the moment. Maybe when the Dwarves are reworked, making an alliance with Grombrindle is going to be worth it, but yeah, I've made alliances with Grombrindle and it hasn't really necessarily paid off in a lot of the campaigns I've done so. Because the Dwarves just aren't really strong at the very moment in the game. But anyway, what does Khatep have? He does reduce the right cost by 25%, so his rights do get a significant cost reduction. In particular, the one that's really significant is the Great Incantation of Tahat, which gives you a Casket of Skulls, as well as Recruit rank and Lord Recruit rank. That's a good amount of power over there, and you can get them much cheaper than anyone else. Then he does get a mortuary crafting cost of minus 25%. Making crafting items over here much cheaper to do than the other ones. And then he also starts with hero capacity for 2 Lich Priests. He does start with 1 Lich Priest, and you can get another one very quickly. And you can get a good amount of Lich Priests, for instance, free very quickly in your campaign. Because on a personal level, he will also get an extra hero capacity for Lich Priest. So he can get 3 Lich Priests very quickly in his campaign once he gets high enough rank and unlocks his special skill tree. He also gets a research benefit, construction cost for structures in his entire province, more Lich Priests over there, 4 in total, as well as recruit rank for his army for skeleton Hekar warriors, skeletal warriors, skeletal spearmen, archers, and tomb guards, which is pretty sweet. He is a caster lord. He doesn't have the same kind of combat potential that Settra does, though he does have a Casket of Souls mount, which is going to give him a significant amount of combat power. He's basically a walking artillery unit, a really good walking artillery unit that can devastate his enemies very quickly. On top of that, he does get character experience plus 25%, 10% campaign movement range, and a bunch of buffs to warriors, tomb guard, skeletons in general. Recruit to Ushaptis, melee defense to Ushaptis. Like, he's a bit weird because he buffs tomb guards, Nehakara warriors, but he also buffs Ushaptis. He is pretty good, all things considered. His item is nothing special as far as I'm concerned, but he does start in a fairly safe position. His enemies don't, his neighbors don't despise him. For instance, here I can make an alliance with the Sisters of Twilight, though I do find them to not be particularly great allies. Now, whereas Dark Elves would be great allies. Fun fact, you may make an alliance with Malekith, but you're probably going to want to wipe out Morathi. Though I'm sure Malekith won't really care too much about that, to be honest with you. But yeah, he starts in a great position. He can get a lot of power. He can get going. This is turn 32, and I already have 2 armies here in the south, 2 to the north, and 2 to the north, and I am going to work on getting another one. Now, sadly enough, the books where they spawn, the one for extra army capacity, is down here, all the way down here in the south, so that's quite a journey. But Khatep doesn't really need to worry about that. He only starts a war with a minor enemy, and then he can decide who he's gonna fight. Does he fight Tarax? Does he fight the ogres that start over here? Does he fight Malekith? Does he fight Grombrindle? He has various choices available to him in his campaign, and he can get a lot of power. Are there downsides? Yes, sadly enough, there are significant downsides. He can settle the wasteland just fine, and he can settle the mountains just fine, but he doesn't have a lot of those surrounding him. Rather, what he has around him is a lot of frozen climate, which is not a good climate for him. Nor is the jungle good climate for him. And the Tomb Kings already struggle enough with construction time and construction costs of their building. Adding on top of that makes his campaign worse than what the others have to deal with. And really, what your best solution would be to head over here in Araby and in the Land of the Dead to get good territory for you to colonize. So that's a very, very long journey for you to do. And yeah, in terms of victory conditions, you do actually need to go over there for the long campaign victory conditions if you want to win your campaign. So he starts far away from everyone else, and he has to make his way there anyway. That isn't necessarily the best campaign in the world, and that is going to limit him in his mid and late game potential. However, he does start incredibly strong in the early game in a relatively safe location, and he does have room to expansion. He can choose who he's going to go at war with. He isn't the best combatant himself, though he does have some decent magic and powerful artillery, because he is going to be riding an artillery piece, but he does have some issues in his campaign as well. Though, to be quite honest with you, I would be very curious to play a campaign as Khatep, because having those kind of early game options, those kind of choices, that kind of flexibility that he does have, can make for an interesting campaign. Though I've played plenty of campaigns as of late in Nagron, so I'm going to be looking to switch that up. But yeah, Khatep, a fairly solid choice, and number 3. Now at number 2, we have High Queen Khalida, who, as far as I'm concerned, starts probably with the best army of all of them. She does have a Lich Priest. That's nothing too special. Outside of poor Settra, they all start with a hero. But she does have Ushaptis with great bows, which are pretty strong, as well as a Screaming Skull Catapult, which is a pretty strong artillery units. So she has a great deal of range power from the very beginning of her campaign. On top of that, as opposed to all the others, she can colonize pretty much all of the climates that surround her. She starts over here in a desert in the crater of the Walking Dead, but she has a jungle next to her, and she can colonize that, no problem. She can colonize the mountains, the jungle, the wasteland. All of the territory here in the Southlands she can take all the way down to the Southern Chaos Wastes. And that makes her campaign incredibly strong because she's not going to spend that extra money or have the weaker income if she's trying to colonize territory that isn't suitable to her. And she only has one initial enemy over here in the Silver Host in Lamia, which are fairly easy to deal with because she's more powerful than they are. On top of that, she gets diplomatic relations plus 10 with all factions, which means that factions that border her are going to be less likely to declare war against her. For instance, Clan Moors, while they don't like what I've done against the Silver Host, I could potentially get a non-aggression pact if I had more money with them. That diplomatic bonus does make it less likely for wars, pointless wars, to happen. For instance, the Skaven in the south here, at one point were quite eager to get the non-aggression pact with me, though I think I'm going to prefer going with a deal with Krokar over here. Or maybe wipe him out and take the jungle for myself. You do have choices in your campaign. Then you get 15% research rate, which is fairly significant because it makes it easier to unlock the dynasties to get that armored capacity that the Tomb Kings so desperately need. And then ammunition, 20% to all armies, which isn't too significant, I feel, for archers, but it can be fairly significant for your artillery and your Ushaptis, since ammo can be something of an issue for these units from the very beginning. They can do a lot of damage, but the amount of ammo that they're using can be fairly significant. Now, she doesn't have any particular great skills in terms of her, well, her lord benefits, nor does her item give her anything substantial. When it comes to her special skill tree, she does get some nice benefits, an army ability over here in the Legionary Barrage, Frenzy for all units, physical resistance, benefits to Sepulchre Stalkers and Necropolis Knight units, benefits to attrition, some buffs, but again, nothing too significant from my perspective, although 12% missile strength for skeleton archers and sepulchre stalkers can be pretty sweet to get. And getting 25% ammunition for skeletal archers on top of the faction-wide benefit of 20% that you already get, like, you're looking at your skeletal archers having almost 50% extra ammunition. That is pretty good when you add it all up. She starts in a safe position, and her only real foe early on, it may end up being Forik, who, well, he is not necessarily going to be as powerful as you are. Now, another benefit that she has is that she can get a book here. That's the 5th book, though it is random from my experiences. It can be random which book you're getting here. But if you get this one, you can get your army capacity to 2 very quickly. And all you have to do is kill poor Forik, and then get multiple armies. Though granted, in this case, it is turn 11 and he's got already a full stack of troops and then a second stack, and he may end up being actually a substantial issue to deal with over here. But I do feel like Khalida's army is going to curb stomp him fairly easily. And once you do get going, and again, you have a fairly safe starting position, Forik or not, Queek or not. Hell, you might even want to just head up there once you take Lamia and wipe out Queek yourself to deal with him. But once you've dealt with those initial enemies, you have room to expand in whatever direction you want to go for. You can go into the desert, you can go into the mountains, you can go into the jungle, and you have that kind of flexibility that the other lords just don't. And because you have that diplomatic relations benefit, certain factions that might be very eager to declare war on you are going to be less eager. The aversion still is going to bite you in the ass, but you do benefit from quite a bit when you are playing as Khalida. You have a good starting position, good starting army, and you have a good expansion path available. My advice, make sure that the 5th book lands over here, or maybe even over here, but honestly generally here in the last plateau. Getting that 5th book, getting that army capacity and tomb guard capacity could help you out a great deal in your early game. Fighting Forik is not necessarily fun, but you can do it, and you win that battle and you start steamrolling, because it means you'll be able to get free armies very quickly in your campaign. Maybe even 4 if you delay finishing this research, change it up, and you do have faster research than the other Tomb Kings. Finally, and number 1, and as far as I'm concerned, far above the competition, it is the Lich King himself, Arkhan the Black. What does he get that makes him so very powerful? Well, he starts with an extra army capacity from the very beginning of his campaign. So it means he can start recruiting a lot of units for his second army very, very quickly, and get 2 full stacks to throw against Rapans, who is his main initial enemy over here on the campaign early on. And once she's dealt with, you're gonna be in a fantastic position. As I've said, the Tomb Kings can struggle to get going because of the limitations they have, but Arkhan doesn't have one of those main limitations, the army capacity, so he doesn't need to rush research. This is the added benefit here of having an extra army, means that he can spend his sweet time getting the research done, almost finish it, and then switch to another dynasty and have 2 dynasties by like turn 30 that are ready to complete, and he can get 2 armies almost at the same time when it comes to it. That's already a significant amount of power, but he gets more. That's just the start. His campaign starting position is one of the best in the game, because Araby is a fairly safe position. No one's really going to invade you via the sea, maybe in northern Araby, a bit from Sartosa over there, but not quite that likely. And that gives him a very safe starting position in the campaign, allowing him to expand wherever he wants. On top of that, he gets diplomatic relations benefit with the vampire counts and coast, and he can recruit special or enhanced vampire count units. What does that translate into? That translates into having the Grave Hill, which allows him to recruit quite a few Crypt Ghouls, Direwolves, and Fellbats at level 1, and even Hex Wraiths at level 3. The capacity won't increase. In fact, the capacity is very strong to begin with, but you can also get Hex Wraiths at level 3. And he does start with a unit of Hex Wraiths from the very start, and he can get Crypt Ghouls and a lot of units very, very quickly in his campaign. So he has a significant amount of combat power from the very beginning of his campaign and can get the steamroller going very, very quickly. More than that, we also have his special skill tree, which gives him more recruitment capacity, missile strength for Casket of Souls, a bunch of benefits in battle, though he's not going to compare to Settra, melee attack for Fellbats and Crypt Ghouls faction-wide, more Lich Priest, so he's not going to be on Khatep's level, but he's almost there. He's half there, basically. A recruit rank for Fellbats, Direwolves, Crypt Ghouls, and Hex Wraiths faction-wide. Some fairly significant benefits. Then when it comes to his items, he can get 10% research from the Staff of Nagash. Not quite as good as Khalida, but pretty close enough, and he will get control benefits to all his provinces. He also gets allegiance points for alliances with vampire counts. Sadly enough, it's not the coast. And yeah, he is incredibly strong because of his starting position. He's a good melee combatant, and he also has some fairly good magic, though more likely you're going to want to go down the melee tree with him. He's not going to hold up against Settra in a pure fight, but he is pretty good enough. Now here's the thing. Another benefit that he has, because he has an extra army, beyond being able to delay the research, he can also take those 2 armies and overwhelm this rogue army that may have the 5th book of Nagash. It's not certain. You may need to start a campaign multiple times to be able to get the 5th book spawning here, but if you do, you can get free armies with no research, no mortuary cult, very quickly. Now, having free armies from very early on in the campaign, let's say by turn 10, because that's how long it would take you to get there, deal with Rapans, deal with the dwarves potentially, having free armies is incredibly powerful, because those free armies can then turn quickly into 4, and then once you get the research, 5, 6, yeah, you'll steamroll the map as Arkhan the Black in a way no other legendary lord of the Tomb Kings can hope for. In fact, the starting position, starting with 2 settlements, is one of the best in the game, actually, because not just because Araby is a great area, but because being able to control an entire province from the very start is incredibly potent. Outside of the Warriors of Chaos, the only one that can actually do it is Trog, the Troll King in Northglen, and even he can't do it turn 1, though he can do it turn 2. So yeah, that is a significant amount of power. And how powerful is Arkhan the Black? Just to give you an idea, I don't think I've ever seen him in any campaign die. In any campaign I've played in Immortal Empires, granted I play only on Legendary, but in no campaign that I've played of Immortal Empires have I seen this guy lose. Now, I haven't necessarily seen him expand across the map. He does have some issues with that. Actually, they all do because of the terrain over here in the Southlands. But I've seen him hold up against a substantial number of enemies. How substantial? Well, in my campaign playing as the Vampire Coast as Noctilus, where I allied him, he was being invaded by Skarbrand, Volkmar, and Settra. An unholy alliance was born just to beat the crap out of Arkhan, and they failed. They tried, they couldn't succeed. They had beat him back into Araby, but they couldn't advance to take his core territory. The problem with the Land of the Assassins for the AI is that you do have the Great Desert over here, which is a nightmare to navigate, and then you have the Wizard Caliph Palace, which is going to be heavily fortified. So it can be quite an issue for any invading army to actually threaten his core territories. Unless they go for the mountains or they come from the north, but even then it is not a pleasant journey. And Arkhan is always going to be ahead of the curve because he's always going to have that extra army compared to the other Tomb Kings, giving him a significant amount of power. And because he can get a lot of Crypt Ghouls and Dire Wolves and Hex Wraiths, he has even more power. Generally, the Tomb Kings, when controlled by the AI, struggle. Arkhan does not struggle because he has a great deal of unit capacity. I mean, consider this. He starts with 12 unit capacity total for these units. Now, the Fellbats, okay, fair enough, but 8 unit capacity for Crypt Ghouls and Direwolves is an incredible amount of power that none of the other Tomb Kings have. Even if he didn't start with his extra army capacity, which honestly I think Settra needs far more than Arkhan, he would still be incredibly powerful. But the fact that he does start with an extra army, and he can fill it up very, very quickly, makes him the best legendary lord of the Tomb Kings. And honestly, probably one of the best in the game, really. Not necessarily one I would include in a list, because I feel there are some that are better. But yeah, Arkhan is on a different level than a lot of other legendary lords in the game. And that's all there is to say for it. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.